Hello. Wow, that's loud. Good morning. It's great to see you all here. I'm excited to get into the value, the global value of Bitcoin with you all. I think it's notable that at this event, we are really focused on everything about Bitcoin, really except the price. I don't hear a lot of price talk, and it's so different from other events. I just came from a different event in a different country in South America a few days ago, and because that event was focused on tokens and different schemes and trading, of course the only conversation is price, because that's the only thing that those other technologies do, is enrich the creators. Bitcoin is different, and I firmly believe that we're in a movement here where we're not about our core mission is not making money. Our core mission is not earning Bitcoin to sell it to make more dollars or real or whatever. Our mission is to fix the money, and I think that's really reflected in what Lucas and Andre and their team have created here. So big shout out to the SESCONF team and to Vintium and to everything that's happening here in Brazil. And I think that what's happening here is a real reflection of Bitcoin's global utility. And even though it's 2024 and Bitcoin's been around for 1.5 decades, and people are using it all over the world, and we're here at a Bitcoin conference in Sao Paulo, the establishment continues to ignore Bitcoin, make fun of it, and especially say that it's useless. So this talk is all about why Bitcoin is not useless. Of course, a lot can be said about the savings value of Bitcoin as a technology. There's no better asset. There's no second best. Since Bitcoin was invented, it's been the best performing financial asset in the world. So I don't need to get too much into that. I mean, I feel like at other Bitcoin conferences, people talk to you all day about that. We should all know that it went from a few pennies to where it is today. I want to talk to you more about the other use cases for Bitcoin beyond savings. They're connected, but they're different. And the problem is that most people who run the world, they don't understand these other use cases, and it's because they're blinded by their financial privilege for the most part. And that could be a currency privilege, like, hey, you were born in the dollar and you don't need to worry about, I left some notes in my pocket and I went to Turkey or Brazil or Argentina. It's fine. They'll accept dollars. I mean, if you leave Turkey with notes in your pocket, they're not going to accept them. They're basically like casino tokens. And we have that enormous privilege in a handful of countries, and other people don't. There's also, of course, like the fiat system privilege in terms of are you able to get a bank account? Are you able to be an accredited investor? There's so many permissioned things about the financial system today, and that make it very hard for people to understand or to sympathize with why Bitcoin is so important. So, that means we have people like Warren Buffett, telling you that Bitcoin is like rat poison, or Bill Gates telling you that it's a greater fool theory of investment, or Jamie Dimon talking to you about how Bitcoin is worthless. I mean, it's staggering. Charlie Munger, before he passed away, says he hated Bitcoin, and he said that the development is contrary to the interests of civilization. That shows you where these people are. They're completely on a different track. They're on the track to make money. We're over here on the track to fix money. This is a representative from the US government who a few months ago claimed that there's still no legitimate use case for Bitcoin. And this is probably the most prestigious magazine in the United States of America. It's been operating for a century and a half, older than most countries. And a couple months ago, they said 15 years into its existence, Bitcoin is yet to demonstrate any serious use case. So politicians, government officials, central bankers, the media, and most of the elites are trying to tell you that Bitcoin is dangerous, risky, bad for the planet, but most importantly, useless and a waste of energy. So in this talk today, we're going to talk about why that's not true. So I've tried to break it down into 3 use cases. I've mentioned that savings is sort of obvious. Anyone who's going to try to argue with you that Bitcoin is a bad savings technology is a bad faith actor, and they're just not looking at the facts. So we don't need to cover that. But we're going to talk about how Bitcoin is a tool for commerce, freedom, and power. So with each section, I'll give you a little mantra to take home. right? So first section, commerce. The mantra, if all you take home are 3 sentences, well, the first one's going to be, we have financial privilege. Now, I say we as an ambassador from the country of America, right? Here is different, right? We are in South America, a place that has historically been really exploited historically by greater powers elsewhere. But when I say we, I'm talking about sort of the global establishment. And this is really, really important. This is a photo I took when I was in Malawi last year. I just took it out the window of my car when I was passing through a street market. What's important to note is that the people in this photo at this market, small business owners, people just trying to get by, had just lived through a 44% overnight currency devaluation. And I know that you all know a lot about currency devaluations here. Brazil is famous for having some of the craziest inflation in history. Same thing with Argentina, same thing with Venezuela. But often I'm giving a talk and people don't understand what that is. And, these people have lived through that. And the saddest part is these are some of the last people in the world that need a 44% overnight currency devaluation. They don't have good monetary technology. Unlike people in Argentina and Brazil who can escape into dollars if they have to. I just went to Argentina, I went to the cuevas, I understand it's clunky and it's crazy that people have to go through this process to trade their pesos for dollars, but at least there's a little bit of an escape. I mean, people can buy real estate. I mean, in Malawi, only 11% of the people have electricity. The savings technology they have access to is like sheet metal cows or cash, kwacha cash. It's paper notes. So basically, they've been working, and the fruit of their labor they store in kwacha. Okay, and then the kwacha, the government informed them without any discussion. There was no referendum. This was not democratic. Nobody said, hey, who wants to lose 44% of their purchasing power next Wednesday? It never happened. Overnight, they just said, this is the deal. And all of a sudden, all this savings you've been accumulating for your family, for your future, is just magically worth 44% less. And again, these people make about $100 per year. They're some of the poorest people in the world. They don't need this. So I feel very strongly that currency devaluation is a crime against humanity because it hurts every single person in a country pretty much, instantly. You can make weapons that hurt people or a lot of people in a particular area, but a weapon that can hurt every single person in a country instantly with a snap of a finger is perhaps the worst one of all, and it's wielded all the time. Here's an article from the BBC about what I saw in Malawi. Unbelievable, 44% overnight drop. And it has such a big impact on commerce, right? So your ability to do business. This is a statement, and I'll just TLDR it for you. The main idea is that a big telecom in Malawi basically made about 36 billion kwacha the year before. Some number of millions of dollars, right? But because of the currency devaluation, they're projecting no income at all for the coming year. So that's a big company. Now imagine all the small business owners. So when you do this, you just create a crazy depression, an economic depression in the country. And that's intentional. Now the interesting part about these currency devaluations is they're usually done in tandem with the IMF, right? So the IMF will come to Malawi, it'll consult in a very nice hotel with the government, and it'll say, listen, you guys need to export more stuff. The world needs cheaper products from you so we can buy more. So you need to trim down. It's almost like private equity trying to take over a company. You need to cut everything. You need to cut any subsidies you give for healthcare education to the people. You need to cut the value of the currency. You need to devalue. And you need to raise taxes on everybody. And this is the playbook. It's called structural adjustment. People call it austerity. But the reality is what you just saw. The reality is suffering for an entire country. And again, I know that a lot of you have lived through these and you understand these. But usually when I'm giving talks in Europe and the United States, people are totally clueless. They don't understand what it means to live through a structural adjustment. The huge protests in Kenya all this summer. And the IMF basically told the Kenyan government to ignore the anti-tax protests, right? Historically, the IMF preferred to work with dictators. There's actually some crazy stories from Brazil from the 1950s and 60s that I'm sure you all could educate me more about. But there were governments here in Brazil that were removed from power by the IMF. It's really, really crazy. Happened in many, many, many countries. not so much directly anymore, but for a long period, a very important time during Latin America's growth after World War II, when the country became very rich as an exporter of commodities while the West was fighting each other. A lot of governments here had big treasuries where they had accumulated a lot of money from exporting different things to Europe and America. All of a sudden, structural adjustment came in, governments were removed, and people were put on a diet of austerity. And, then people rose up against that, and there were so many civil wars and guerrilla movements, and, it was quite sad. For so long, there was really only two sides. You either had to be on the neoliberal side to support the IMF, or you were on maybe the Marxist side saying no, and, the reality is neither of these sides are a good solution, but there wasn't really like a third way, right? You either kind of followed the Soviet Union or you followed the United States of America, and, obviously the former was certainly not interested in anyone's success. And the latter, sadly, as an American, the reality I've learned is that we weren't either, right? But here's the cool part about Bitcoin. Couple things, good one to take a photo of, but a couple just quick things about use cases for Bitcoin when it comes to commerce and the economy. Bitcoin users cannot be structurally adjusted. It's a pretty good one. So if you save and use Bitcoin, the government cannot magically devalue your currency. They enjoy the real rate of exchange. This is really important for countries that have two different exchange rates. So for example, in Nigeria, the official rate might be 1,000 naira per dollar. So when you send a wire transfer, the recipient gets 1,000 naira per dollar. But the real rate on the street is 2,000 naira per dollar. So the government's just stealing half your money. So if you use Bitcoin to send money peer-to-peer to someone in Nigeria, the recipient gets the real rate of exchange. Bitcoin users speak a global monetary language. This was hinted at earlier today on stage when we talked about the Lightning Network being connective tissue for all of us. At the end of the day, we're all going to have our own mints, companies, banks, nodes, maybe layer 2 projects, different kinds of perhaps privacy pools. There'll be all these different ways that people interact with Bitcoin, and they'll all be speaking to each other over the Lightning Network. So we have this common monetary language that's accessible by anybody on Earth, no permission required. That's incredibly powerful. And I'll say that any attempt to gatekeep the Lightning Network or KYC the Lightning Network is not a good idea, because first of all, it'll fail because open networks win in the end. But at the end of the day, the power of this thing is that we can all speak the same language. If all of a sudden, well, we have this Lightning Network over here and this Lightning Network over here, it's not going to end very well. So be careful of people doing that. The final thing I'll just say is Bitcoin users escape the currency caste system. So what you have today is 180 currencies, right? Going from the dollar and the euro and maybe a couple other reserve currencies, meaning a currency strong enough that another central bank would want to save in it, right? It's not like the Brazilian central bank saves in Malawi and Kwacha. Obviously not. You would laugh at that. They save in debt from the US, Europe, and maybe that's probably about it. Maybe some countries are starting to experiment with the Chinese currency. I don't think that's going to work out very well. But at the end of the day, the point is that most people on Earth live in a country where the government issues a weak currency. You only have about 1 billion people in the world that live in a country that has like more or less a liberal democracy with free speech and property rights on the one hand, and on the other hand, that has a reserve currency. So the other 7 billion people live in a country that really suffers from either a very weak governance or very weak currency. And it's no surprise that Bitcoin is so increasingly used in the global majority countries, right? Maybe not so much in the West, but around the world where it's needed most. And the only way this IMF system with the structural adjustment stuff can work is with different currencies. Like the whole point is like, okay, we have the dollar over here, okay, and you guys have the peso over here. Okay, we're going to come and like squeeze you over here down so that we, with the dollar, can get cheaper stuff. That's how it works. Okay, if all of a sudden we're all in one open, neutral currency that's the same for all of us, you can't do that anymore. Now, you can still repress. It doesn't solve everything. But we take that away from them, and we take that red magic button that they like to push away from them. Governments in a Bitcoin standard would be forced to take tough choices. If you can no longer just devalue the currency overnight, right, if you're all in a Bitcoin standard, well, then maybe you're going to have to cut fiscal. Maybe you have to cut spending. Maybe you have to raise taxes. Maybe you have to try to sell bonds. These are all things that are hard to do. But these are things that governments are going to have to do when they can't just magically hit a button and destroy the currency overnight to fund their latest scheme. Another really important reason in the commerce area that Bitcoin is so important is this. It goes back to the permissionless nature of Bitcoin. I mean, 2 billion people don't even have IDs. I mean, how absurd it is. You can't even, all of these wonderful opportunities to invest in companies and grow are only available to a tiny number of people who not only have the particular ID and the particular nationality required, but also have a particular amount of capital and a particular amount of ability to hire the right people to figure out what paperwork they need to fill out. And only they can do the first check into Uber. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. So how incredible is it that any refugee or anyone, we don't even care what country they're from, they have to have no documentation at all, could have made an investment that has outperformed Uber from the beginning, and that is Bitcoin. That is the absolute revolution we're talking about here. And it's available to everyone. We have so many issues around the world with unbanked. We've got almost 250 million unbanked people in India, 100 million in China. In so many countries, women have so many fewer bank accounts than men. I mean, in some countries where you might think people are fairly banked, women have less than 25%, less than 15, 10, even 5% of them have bank accounts. So sometimes it's the only currency available to people. And it's also an escape, again, from not just structural adjustment imposed by some foreign power, but of course, hyperinflation imposed by a corrupt regime at home, right? So a friend of mine made this for me. She is a Venezuelan, and she told me that that's how much a cup of coffee in her town cost her 2016, 450 bolivars. The next year it cost her 4,500. The next year it cost 1.4 million. And you hear stories, not just from Venezuela, but from the Zaire in the 1990s, from Hungary and other Eastern European states about 50 years ago during the Soviet occupation. These countries, Brazil here, not too long ago, when people undergo hyperinflation, there are stories of people waiting in a queue for something, and by the time they get to the front of the queue, the price of the thing has changed. We were just in Argentina, and it's considered a big success that inflation is down to like 2 to 3% per month, right? In America, we're like, wow, 2% per year is our goal, right? That's a targeting from the Fed, right? They're telling you how much they want to steal from you, and they're like 2% is okay. Well, imagine 2% a month. I mean, geez, and that's considered a success in today's world. So we're all about building an escape from that, building a plan B, building a way out of this. Thankfully, many Venezuelans learned about Bitcoin, and they were able to get out of this scheme that basically incinerates the savings of the lower and middle class people. The wealthy they can get out of this. What they were doing in Venezuela, actually, they were taking out loans in bolivars and buying property in Miami Beach and then just watching the value of the loan go to zero. But the average person can't do that, right? And it has big ramifications also for humanitarianism, not just profit commerce, but how we help each other. The Venezuelan government tried to stop aid coming in to people a few years ago. This is a photo from the New York Times. You can see they stopped the aid trucks from coming in. But what you don't see is that there's millions of dollars of Bitcoin moving back and forth that are impossible to stop. So this age of governments being able to control the economy, control the people, is coming to an end. And, that maybe matters most for some of our friends who are in places that are disconnected from the world, right? This is a famous tweet from a friend of mine, Zia, from inside Iran. This is from 2019, and there was a troll account on social media that liked making fun of Bitcoin, and they're like, basically, what does Bitcoin do that Apple Pay can't do? And let's forgive the sort of idiocy of this post, but my friend Zia from Iran responded and said, look, I can't use any of that stuff, but I can use Bitcoin. What do you have to say? And of course, the person couldn't say anything because they had no way to respond to that they were wrong. To wrap this first section, couple ideas. One of the biggest superpowers that Bitcoin has is that it cannot discriminate. It cannot discriminate against you. It doesn't have that ability. And humans are fallible. We all discriminate in our lives, but to have an open protocol that can't do that is very important. Again, the fact that you don't need permission, you don't need to sign up with your ID to use it, very profound. The fact that people can't be structurally adjusted can't be said enough. And, a nice little quote from a friend of mine, maybe Bitcoin isn't for everyone, but it is for anyone. And I wanted to show you this this quote just to give you a sense of the grit that's involved in the humanitarian space. I won't read the whole thing, but basically what Dr. Erica's saying here is that in the aid world, at the highest levels, people who have access to the World Bank, the UK government, and the Treasury, they weren't able to get money where it needed to go. It was being canceled digitally. People had to carry cash around. It was a total nightmare. And she basically says that at a major humanitarian conference recently, one of the big actors said that payment issues are now the #1 threat to the humanitarian space, right? So again, Bitcoin fixes this. And people understand that, right? Around the world, we're seeing this. Ukraine, Lebanon, Turkey, Argentina. Bitcoin adoption is growing. And if you look at this chart over here, where Bitcoin adoption is highest is in countries that have been structurally adjusted in the past, faced a lot of inflation, Nigeria, Philippines, Turkey, Argentina, Brazil, right? Some people say, well, there's limits on that. What about all these countries where people have limited access to the internet? Well, there's an incredible entrepreneur here named KG. He's here at this conference. He created this technology called Machankura. It allows people to send and receive Bitcoin without the internet. Think about that for a second. What a civilizational achievement. So they basically use SMS. It brings up an account with like a text tree, and you can use human-readable Lightning addresses. And by the way, Lightning address is something invented by Brazilians. Amazing. So you have Brazilians inventing a technology that's empowering South Africans to figure out how to get people without the internet to use open money for everyone. It wasn't going to happen in New York or San Francisco. I'll tell you that much. Next section, freedom. This one, kind of my bread and butter. I'm a human rights activist, right? So the mantra to take home is Bitcoin is bad for dictators, really quite bad for dictators. I'll explain why. So historically, money used to look like that. You would make a small transaction, and I'm talking about retail money. I'm not talking about investments or large-scale trade, okay, between nation states or corporations. I'm talking about like a person going down the street to buy something in a daily way. The overwhelming majority of economic transactions, from hundreds of years ago until a few decades ago, were done with paper or metal. So obviously limitations, but when you pay for something with paper or metal, the merchant doesn't know anything about you natively at that protocol level, right? At the technology level, they'd have to ask you additionally, which they just didn't do, right? It was fine. It was normal. You would buy something with cash, and they didn't know your birth date or what you bought last week, or but they couldn't build a model to know what you're going to buy next. But today, when you do a swipe or a tap, that information is not only available for governments, but it's instantly hoovered up and sold to third parties, brokers. I'll tell you a little story about this. A few years ago, I walked into a pet food store. I was buying treats for my dog, toothbrush-shaped treats. And I put my credit card in the terminal at the store, and I left. And then a few minutes later, I'm sorry, I'm an addict of social media. I'm trying to get off, but I was hit by an advertisement for toothbrush-shaped dog treats. And I'm like, wait a second. How did they know I didn't buy parakeet food or something like that? It can't be geolocation. And I dug into it, and I read through the agreements with my credit card, and I dug into it. I talked to more people, did some research, and found out that essentially my credit card company, as soon as a transaction goes through, they sell that data to all kinds of companies, who then, are making money in the advertising business. So we have surveillance capitalism on the one hand, and we have, authoritarian surveillance on the other that is being empowered, and it's on steroids because of the digitization of money in the way it proceeded until the creation of Bitcoin, essentially. So you can think about how bad that is for everybody, but especially people who live under authoritarian governments. When I say that, I mean quite simply a political structure where there are no opposition parties. Like in Cuba, you cannot have an opposition party. There's no such thing. There's only one party, right? Everything in the schools has to be approved by the state, right? So there are a lot of problems with the world, but authoritarianism is a particular one, right? And it is something, obviously, that everyone in South America dealt with at one point or another. And it's a scourge, and we need to move beyond it. Unfortunately, 5.7 billion people still live under some obvious form of authoritarianism, right? Where there's really no free speech or independent political parties, et cetera, et cetera. The irony is kind of the evolution of censorship in the financial world you could say it started in the West, even though now it has the biggest burden on people under authoritarian regimes. And what I'm getting at here is, for a very long time, our payment technology was not good enough for governments to be able to do micro-targeting of payment censorship. A lot of the retail payments were physical, paper money, even check. It wasn't until recently that people could actually start to map your transactions and then selectively censor, right? That's only been something that's been able to happen in the last few decades with the rise of the digitization of our financial systems. And in 2010, this came really to the fore when an activist who was leaking, information indicating that the United States had committed war crimes. They had this nonprofit had leaked this information, and the U.S. government and all of its allies did a banking blockade, right, on WikiLeaks. And this becomes a tactic, is my point. And I'll come back to WikiLeaks later. But the point is, in around 2010, governments all around the world started to think about using money as a way to stymie their opponents. And now it's a tidal wave, right? So maybe 20 years ago, it was something that some governments were playing with. We'd barely scratched the surface of KYC, AML laws. Pre 9/11, we didn't really have a lot of that stuff. But in one decade, it became just the immediate first tactic any tyrant uses against you is they freeze your stuff. This is just common today. So in Nicaragua, for example, the Ortega regime, they just routinely freeze the bank accounts of anyone who opposes them. The church, students, the Jesuits, whatever. In Hong Kong, India, Russia, Turkey, this stuff is happening all over the place. The person who probably has pioneered this the most is Modi in India. The Modi regime has probably experimented the most with freezing the bank accounts of opponents, environmentalists, labor leaders, all kinds of people. Iran has taken this to the next level, right? So they have all these surveillance cameras bought from China all over the cities. And they started to roll out something earlier this year that I want you to think about because it's kind of chilling. You can think about what would happen in your country or your context. So what happens is they use basically big data analysis. And when a woman who's not properly covering her hair the right way is caught on a camera, they match it to her identity and then they auto-fine her, okay? So you can think about that for a second. What else are they going to auto-fine you for in the future? So what's exciting about Bitcoin is that some of these things are much harder to do. It's much harder for Xi Jinping to micro-track you if you're using non-KYC Bitcoin. It's much harder for Putin to freeze your stuff if you're using self-custodial Bitcoin. The Burmese government can't delete your property records if you're storing it in self-custodial Bitcoin. And of course, as we've covered, Chavismo and other governments cannot hyperinflate your savings if you're storing it outside the fiat system. And activists started to realize this. I mean, obviously, going back to WikiLeaks, it was funny when Julian was like thanking the US government for forcing him into the alternative and then making a massive return. And recently, Julian's escape from prison was financed, the actual physical escape, by someone with Bitcoin. So, the Bitcoin continues to play a key role in that story. This is how the Human Rights Foundation first got involved, was 10 years ago in Ukraine. Actually, this is more than 10 years ago. This is 2013. So this is the original Reddit post by someone that we met, and they were basically asking us to help fund some of the activists who would later participate in Maidan Square to overthrow the corrupt Yanukovych regime in Ukraine. And they said something quite pithy. I love this statement. Only Bitcoin can reach them. It's just really, really interesting, and I think that's something for us to reflect on. And then other activists started using Bitcoin to escape. The Navalny Foundation has been using Bitcoin since 2016. Hundreds of Bitcoin raised. And mainly to protect the identity of the donors donating to them, right? The donors were afraid to donate because they knew if they used a wire, they'd get arrested potentially. So, and again, there's a lot of work to be done in helping people using good privacy in Bitcoin. It's not necessarily easy, but they were able to do this effectively and to protect their donors and to keep going, and it was a lifeline for them. Bitcoin fueled protests in Nigeria, fueled protests in Belarus. It fueled the ability of people to escape from Venezuela. I mean, I think this idea that you can memorize your savings in your head or write it down or even send it on Signal to your friend in another country is not really properly been studied yet. That's going to have such a huge impact on humanity. This article from 10 years ago showed how a friend of mine was paying women in Afghanistan with Bitcoin. Again, the superpower of Bitcoin is it can't discriminate, right? So even today, what this person is doing now, her name's Roya Mahbub, she can't do this anymore. The Taliban don't permit education of girls. So she uses Bitcoin to fund underground schools, and she keeps going. But it's not possible to do with the US dollar. The US dollar can do a lot of things. It cannot fund underground education in Afghanistan. It's just not technologically capable, and Bitcoin can. In Palestine, people have been raising money using Bitcoin. It's very, very, very difficult to get any fiat currency inside war zones more broadly, but especially Gaza, the West Bank, southern Lebanon. But there's great on-the-ground humanitarian, grassroots people helping people just from a humanitarian sense. We're not talking politics here, who should be in power, who should not be in power, just helping people who are starving, being starved, being bombed. This Geyser campaign is no longer up. I just wanted to highlight it because it was so impressive. But if you look up this account over here on X, you can, or the NPub here, you can find the person and donate to them peer-to-peer. But I thought this was quite powerful. In Ukraine, Ukraine was the highest per capita digital asset kind of country in the world before Putin invaded. So a lot of people who left Ukraine, they were able to bring their wealth with them. Even in democracies. I thought this was very notable. When Trudeau had he went after the fundraising attempts of the truckers who didn't agree with the biomedical policy of the Canadian government. All of the fiat fundraising was just immediately shuttered. 100% of the money was taken. But to get the Bitcoin, it was actually harder. There is no if you're using self-custodial Bitcoin, if you're running your node, there's no big button they can press. They cannot remotely confiscate the funds. So they had to use the court system, and they had to use these crazy draconian laws, and they had to go house by house. They had to find people. At the end of the day, 70% of what was raised made it to the protesters. I thought that was very notable. It's even a lifeline for people who've been cut out, from the formal economy in democratic societies, whether they be gun owners, marijuana growers, sex workers. Really the most marginalized communities can benefit from this thing, even in democracies. And this was perhaps the craziest story of all. A friend of mine was telling me that people who escaped North Korea into China, they don't speak Chinese. 70% of them are women. They usually go right into sex trafficking. They go right into sex work. And to rescue them, you have to work with these groups inside. It's very secret. It's very hard. And you basically have to, pay for their release. And it's really hard to do that. If you're American and trying to coordinate with the broker in China, it's impossible. So they started using Bitcoin, and it's much easier for these people to rescue these people now using this technology. But that was quite profound. Again, I think Bitcoin's a light, even in the darkest of places, as I've covered. It can help us escape the end game of that image I showed you earlier, where we went from paper and metal technology to digital technology, and we were heading more and more and more towards control. One of the best books on that is Lynn Alden's Broken Money, where she points out that it was inevitable that we would go towards the centralization of fiat money. Scientifically, that's where it was driving. But the invention of Bitcoin gave us a new way, where now the more advanced we can get, in theory, the more free we can get. It's a completely different way, and it's a way out. As far as why it's bad for dictators, I think I've covered a lot of that. But you just have to think about what do Putin and Xi do? What do they feel about Bitcoin? And what do dictators need, whether it be in your city or your town or your country? Well, they need censorship, confiscation, and closed capital markets. That's the only way. The RMB will never be the reserve currency of the world because they don't want to have an open capital market, right? But what is Bitcoin? And for me, what is the founding ideals of America that still inspire me despite everything our country does, are these things: free speech, property rights, and open capital markets. So take that away from this. One thing I've discovered in my career is that, I'm very proud of all the work we do at HRF, but generally speaking, a lot of human rights activism is just sort of virtue signaling. It's like, okay, free this country, free that country. Are you actually going to help somebody inside? What's going on? But if you can teach somebody about how to achieve individual financial freedom, that's real impact. And it leads me to sort of believe that pound for pound, helping people learn about Bitcoin might be the single most effective form of activism. So that's what keeps me going. So here's my little statement to all the haters and deniers who say Bitcoin is useless or dangerous. It's out there every day, every hour, in collapsed economies in the darkest corners of the world, helping people that no one else is willing to help, being a lifeline for anyone. Humanity has failed most people on Earth badly. Our monetary and aid systems have not delivered global prosperity and freedom, but Bitcoin is slowly, steadily uniting, enriching, liberating us. It makes me very fired up. So we'll get to the last use case, right? So we covered commerce and freedom. Now we're going to go to power. And when I say power, I mean electric power. And man, am I fired up about this, because I just visited an absolutely incredible Bitcoin mine not far from here, just across the Brazilian border in Paraguay. I visited an enormous, beautiful operation that runs on hydroelectric power. And it's really filled me with a lot of ideas. But basically, the mantra here is Bitcoin saves wasted energy, right? And the people I showed at the beginning of this talk, not only do they think that, Bitcoin is not good for commerce and that Bitcoin is good for bad guys, they also think Bitcoin wastes energy. So the funny thing is they're wrong on all three counts. And there's nothing more noble than trying to give people more access to electricity. It's the only way we're going to advance civilization, is to have people have more and more and more electricity per capita. This is a great quote from Robert Bryce. Electricity matters because it's the ultimate poverty killer. A lot of you have seen this before, but it's just worth mentioning again. This is sort of per capita income versus per capita energy consumption. I mean, you cannot be a rich country if you don't use a lot of energy. This should be sort of obvious as we go from a society that had a life expectancy of about 25 to a society where people can live much, much longer and happier lives and even explore the stars. We're going to use a lot more energy, right? Here's another way of looking at that. Here are two countries, Vietnam and Korea, the Republic of Korea. And you can see that over time, as they used more energy, they got richer. Or as they got richer, they used more energy. But it's very, very, very correlated. So going back to Malawi, you cannot advance civilizationally if only 11% of your people have electricity. So who's going to come in and help, right? And the answer is global capitalism has failed, right? There's no, in the fiat system, there's no real incentive for capitalism to solve this. So what happens in this incredibly beautiful place in southern Africa that has so many resources, solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, just completely abundant power potential, no one's there to harness it until now, right? So because global markets aren't interested in this stuff, in providing power to people who don't have it, it usually gets done with what's called concessional financing or donations. And the problem with donations is it creates dependency, and there's no real rush to get things done. So the Scottish government created a micro hydro site, this little village in Bondo, which was the area we're going to be looking at. It took like 15 years to get off the ground. Now, finally, when it did get off the ground, it's awesome, and it uses the power. This is a photo I took. It uses the power from this river coming down off that mountain, and it runs it through a station like this. And the problem with the power company that it faced until recently was that the village and the surrounding community slept at night and didn't use the power during the evening, and the river doesn't sleep, right? So the river just keeps providing energy. And they had no way to harness that power. So if you can only sell 20% of what you're producing, you have to charge a lot, right? So the villagers are paying a ton of money for electricity, and the power company is not profitable. So the environmental trust in this area actually had to subsidize the power, and they had no real way to get more power. They couldn't connect more homes. There was no income stream. So Bitcoin changes everything, right? So Gridless, founded by Eric Herzman, who's here in Brazil, he's here at this event. This is a gridless operation at this very site. Now, three things are happening, right? So number one, the power company is being paid for 100% of what they produce because the Bitcoin network buys 100% of what the village and the community don't buy. So even at night, when the river's flowing, Bitcoin's buying all of it, right? The second thing that's happening is this gives capital to the local power company. So first thing is Gridless is making money, self-interested, there's no altruism there, no need to rely on that. The local power company is making a lot more money, great, now they have capital, they can expand operations, they can connect more homes, they can grow their business. Most importantly, the cost of power, the average cost of power comes down for the average person in the village. And when we talked to the chiefs who run the village, it was pretty interesting. But, look, I don't think they're going to get into a technical conversation with you about the protocol right now, hopefully in the future. But they definitely understood what Bitcoin was doing for them, and they were very, very excited about it. The other thing worth noting is that it's really interesting to think about the externality of Bitcoin mining. And Bitcoin mining is just like a heater, right? So this is 1,000 miles north of Malawi in the DRC. And these are friends of mine who are taking a look at a cocoa processing facility there, where they just drape tarps on the ground and leave the cocoa bean on the ground, and the sun dries it. And it could rain, animals come, it's not that sanitary. They can actually even export this stuff to Western markets. It's not sanitary enough. So they were like, oh, we're going to buy these. We're going to spend $200,000. We're going to buy all these industrial heaters. And these guys said, no. Spend $200,000 on Bitcoin miners and then use the waste heat to dry the cocoa. That's exactly what they did. So now today, you can buy, in Europe, you can buy this like chocolate that's made by Bitcoin mining as an externality. And it's something interesting to think about in the future. If you're a miner, your equation is not just going to be cost of mining minus profit of mining minus cost of mining. It's going to be profit of mining plus profit of externality minus cost of mining. So that really changes a lot of things over time. Here's an example of the chocolate that you can buy now. There's also, what really did it for me, the penny drop moment, was when I visited this geothermal site in Kenya. So this is clean, green, beautiful power. It's going to be the same for the next 40 years, right? This geothermal site. They basically dig a hole in the ground and heats water, spins a turbine, very simple. It goes down to this lake. There's a lake in the background here, and it powers a pump. So, what's interesting is Kenya is the world's largest exporter of flowers, right? So all over Kenya, there's these kind of operations happening. Geothermal's powering a water pump to move water to a field. Well, again, you have constant power and you have variable demand. The water pump's not on all the time, right? So they were just losing a ton of money. They were wasting a lot of electricity. They were wasting energy until Bitcoin. Now Bitcoin can save the electricity. So there's a Starlink on the roof there, and there's a Bitcoin mine right there. And the Bitcoin network is buying 100% of whatever the water pump can't sell. So this is a shot from one of the guys who works at Gridless, and you can see whenever the power cost moves into the green, the Bitcoin miners come on. So it's just like whenever the power cost meets a certain threshold, the miners come on and they buy everything. This could have such huge effects for every country. Forget Kenya. My country is a state in America called California, and we waste so much power. So we curtail so many millions of megawatt hours, right? So in 2021, California curtailed 1,500 kilowatt hours of solar and wind. And in the SPP, which is in the middle of the country, they curtailed 6,300 kilowatt hours of wind. So we're talking about almost 1 million homes that could have been powered, wasted, okay? The UK spent £500 million in that year curtailing wind. Basically, they had too much of it. They didn't know what to do with it. So Bitcoin fixes this. I mean, Bitcoin will buy all of this power, and we can turn it into capital and grow communities. So my point here that I'm getting at is, this is from Resistance Money, an awesome book about Bitcoin. The white is the Bitcoin power consumption today, and you can see it compared to like other air conditioning, obviously is the biggest one, iron and steel, chemicals. But like, you should not be afraid of this circle. This circle should get really big. The bigger the circle gets, the more energy we're saving. And that's the penny drop moment I started to have on that lake in Kenya. Now, a lot of us have seen this chart. It doesn't work like this. You can't build a solar panel the size of that square to power the world. That's not how solar power works, okay? It can't get to Europe. The transmission technology is not good enough. And there's no communities who live in the middle of the Sahara Desert to absorb all that solar power. But they could mine Bitcoin, right? And they can save that stranded energy. They can harness that stranded energy, and they can use it for all sorts of amazing things to advance humans. So, you always see this headline. Bitcoin wastes, is what it says, more electricity than many countries. How is that possible? If we just change our thinking, Bitcoin saves more electricity. Wow, how amazing. Bitcoin saves more electricity than Argentina, right? Wow, that's pretty cool, right? So at the end of the day, I mean, for all the people who say that Bitcoin's useless, and again, not even touching the savings part, if you think about these mantras, you can think about how wrong they are, and you can think about all the incredible things this technology is doing all around the world. And what I'll just sort of conclude with is something I find kind of funny. In America, we have this belief that our investments should help the environment and society, and they should have good governance, and that obviously on its face is amazing. But the ESG people say they hate Bitcoin. But the reality is, if you look at it, Bitcoin is the best ESG investment you could ever make. I mean, it reduces energy waste, expands green power, expands financial inclusion, promotes human rights, and the governance itself is neutral and incorruptible. So, you know, at the end of the day, the funniest thing is that despite everything that is said, Bitcoin is the best ESG investment on the planet. And with that, I wanted to thank you for having me here. Again, incredible work by Lucas and the team. I hope more and more people can understand the global value of Bitcoin, what it's doing, even beyond savings. And to be clear, even if all it did was improve our savings technology, it would be worth all the work, but it does so much more than that. Thank you all so much.